Let's imagine for a moment that it's October 29th, 1963, and you are a UCLA graduate student named Charlie Klein. It's just like any other day. You wake up in the morning, you over-caffeinate yourself, probably stuff yourself full of junk food, and roll into the lab with all the other graduate students. You sit down at your Sigma 7 computer and start typing in the word login. You type an L, you type an O, and then the entire computer crashes, so you don't think much of it. Until you get a call from the folks over at the SRI lab at Stanford letting you know that they got your message. It wouldn't be for a long time until you realized that LO, that simple word you sent, would become the first email ever sent over the internet. So now let's fast forward 50 years to today. We think we have communication mastered. I can text you, call you, email you, video call you. Hell, I can even Snapchat you. Like, who needs that? But how many times have you texted someone, I love you, and felt absolutely nothing? Or video called a desperate friend and felt completely helpless because you can't help them, even though in many ways you are there in every sense of you. In 2013, an industrial designer named Jinsop Lee gave a TED Talk on how to design for the 5 senses. And he makes this argument that all designers know that you have to understand the visuals. That's why people go to art school. That's why people learn how to design, is to make things look nice. But what if we're designing for all 5 of our senses? What if your alarm clock woke you up with smell rather than sound? Or your toothbrush woke you up with taste rather than whatever? And so he makes this point by having his students map out all of their life experiences on a graph that he calls the 5 senses chart. And that chart is very simple. On the x-axis, it just has a list of all of the senses: taste, touch, sound, etc. And on the y-axis is just a scale from 1 to 10. And they have to go through these day-to-day experiences and just mark off and break each of those experiences down to each of those senses. How much, so take, for example, riding a motorbike or a motorcycle. Really, really high sense experience, probably a 10 on sight, 10 on sound, maybe even a 9 or a 10 on touch. The feeling of the wind and riding down the highway. And then you have smell. That's a huge factor, smelling the gasoline of other cars, of the rubber skidding across the asphalt. And the one where it's lacking a little bit is taste. But all across the board, it's pretty much, it's got a couple 10s, it's got some 5s and 6s, and it's got maybe a 2. And you can take more bland activities like eating ramen noodles. Pretty high on taste, but I'm not gonna give it a whole lot of credit, maybe a 5 or a 6. Pretty high on smell, again, maybe a 5 or a 6. And something that's really interesting is part of the experience of eating ramen noodles is the sound. There's that satisfying slurp as you guzzle those noodles down right before you take an exam, and that's, would put that at maybe a 2 or a 3. But the rest of them kind of fall away. And so you have this total score that's significantly lower than riding a motorcycle. But there's one experience that's really interesting and stands out over all other life experiences. And this particular experience scores almost exclusively 9s and 10s across the board. And maybe some of you are thinking of it, but that experience is really great sex. And so we have to think about this and say, how can we design using things that we learn from sex? And something that's really interesting is, so when I would rate that, I would put 9s across the board and maybe an 11 for touch, because touch is the dominating experience in sex. And just the same way that scent is frequently linked to memories, touch, we're finding, is very frequently linked to love and interpersonal relationships and the things that make us want to communicate with each other. So in the 1950s, a guy named Henry Harlow did a series of now controversial experiments on baby rhesus monkeys. And he essentially separated these monkeys from their mothers at birth and put them in wire cages with 2 potential surrogate mothers. And one of them was a metal frame that had a feeder system in it. The other one was just a terry cloth monkey, kind of similar to a plush toy. And at that time, everyone expected the monkeys to cling to this wire frame that had food in it, because all babies want is food, right? That's the sustenance of life. And what blew researchers at the time out of the water is that what the monkeys did instead was cling to that terry cloth monkey until they were starving, run over to the other monkey, feed for a little bit, and go back to that terry cloth monkey. So that led to 20 years later Bowlby's attachment theory, which essentially says that what is really driving human relationships is cuddling with their mothers or caregivers frequently. How can we, that sense of belonging comes from how much we're being touched as a child. And that plays into how we build relationships for our entire life, is kind of from that childhood time. So in the early 2000s, a series of experiments was done where an attractive young man was sent into nightclubs and asked various women to dance. And each time he said the exact same thing. He said, "Hello, my name's Antoine. Would you like to have this dance?" during the slow songs. But he alternated between gently touching the women on their arm or not touching them at all. In cases where he touched the women on the arm, over 65% of them said, "Yes, I would love to have this dance." But when he didn't, just under 40% agreed to the dance. So if you're not convinced, they took this research a step farther, and now they had Antoine go out on the street and just ask completely random women for their phone numbers. But he did the same thing. Half the time, he gently touched them on the arm. Half the time, he didn't. And in cases where he didn't touch them on the arm, 10% of them gave him their cell phone number, which, by the way, kudos to Antoine. That's pretty impressive. But in cases where he did touch them on the arm, 20%, nearly double, agreed to give him their cell phone number. And so that, to me, really proves how important touch is to the way we communicate. And so when we're communicating with the internet, we lose that fundamental skill, which is why, in many cases, you don't feel fulfilled when you're FaceTiming that friend or when you're texting someone that you love them. So let's pedal backwards to technology and go back to that for a second. There's a really interesting Steve Jobs quote from the early days of Apple when he was trying to sell people on the idea that they need a computer, which was a radical concept at the time. I'm just going to read it to you so I don't screw it up. He says, "I read a study that measured the efficiency of locomotion for various species on the planet. The condor used the least amount of energy to move a kilometer. And humans came in with a rather unimpressive showing, about a third of the way down the list. It was not too proud a showing for the crown of creation." So that didn't look so good. But then someone at Scientific American had the insight to test the efficiency of man on a bicycle. And a man on a bicycle completely blew everyone else out of the water, completely off the top of the charts. And that's what a computer is to me. It's the most remarkable tool that we've ever come up with. And it's the equivalent of a bicycle for our minds. And to me, that shows why we're building technology. Why are we constantly pushing the barriers of computing? And it's for efficiency. We're trying to get information passed across the internet as fast as possible. We want to get that message through as fast as possible, make those measurements as fast as possible. But in doing that, have we completely lost all of the things that make us human? Has technology ignored the humanity? And so is it time that we learn how to build a new type of bicycle? There have been attempts at touch over the internet. Take, for example, telepresence robots. So in a business setting, a manufacturing director can log into an iRobot Ava and actually take a walk down the manufacturing line from thousands of miles away. And that gives them a physical presence in the office or a physical presence in the factory. And that's really important to the way they're communicating with their coworkers, because now they can walk up to someone instead of just constantly texting them saying, "Hey, get on Skype, get on Skype, get on Skype." But that doesn't really work when you want to give grandma a hug, or when you want to wander into grandma's house and have some of her homemade chocolate chip cookies. But then there's this huge gap. And then you go into the other people who have tried to integrate touch into internet communication, and that is internet-connected sex toys. There have been product after product trying to recreate this maximum sense experience over the internet, and almost pretty much exclusively all of them have failed. And to me, it's interesting that we've made a jump from 0 to 100% without stopping at things in the middle. So I've spent the last year working on something that was trying to fill that gap in the middle, and I founded a company called Parihug. We make internet-connected teddy bears that let you hug loved ones from anywhere in the world, and it's really simple. It's the most stripped-down version of hug that we could come up with. When one teddy bear is hugged, a suite of sensors detects that hug, transmits it to the other bear, and all it does is gently vibrate out that hug in real time. And what we've come up with is that we're trying to make it as simple as possible. Kids are already attracted to teddy bears, just like Harlow's monkeys are attracted to those plush mothers, because they're soft, they're cuddly, and they feel like they're already hugging back. But that might not be the best solution. We're heading down this path because we think it is, but I dare you guys to come up with what you think would be the best solution. Maybe you already have a way of hugging your loved ones or connecting with those loved ones over the internet. But what I can tell you is that society is really ready to jump on a product or an experience that shows promise of physically connecting us with our loved ones over the internet. And whether that's internet-connected sex toys or Wi-Fi-enabled teddy bears or even jackets that give your pet chicken a hug when you're not home to give them a hug, which exists, by the way, there's a need for a promise that someday, through technical breakthroughs and strengthened connection speeds, we'll be able to return communication to the way it was before we ever had the internet. Thank you.